I'm not my past. I am just who I am right now, right here in the moment.
And 3 kids.
Yeah.
Are we going to have any more?
No.
You're done at 3.
Done.
Elizabeth Smart, I just can't even believe that I get the privilege to be able to talk to you on Skip Intro. You've been so inspiring. Your story and the way in which you have lived such a full life after being victimized in such a horrible way, and the way you've turned it around, and like a mother of 3, and you're an incredible advocate for victims and survivors. And I'm really excited to have you here to talk about your new doc, Kidnapped, Elizabeth Smart.
Family said she'd been taken from her bedroom in the middle of the night.
I saw this cut screen, and the window was wide open. My wife screamed, "Call 911."
I'm curious, why did you want to talk about it again now?
Well, I remember that when I got home, I didn't ever want to talk about it. I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment around what had happened, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. I mean, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I knew there was no way I had invited this in my life, but there still was a lot of shame and embarrassment around what had happened to me. And so I didn't want to talk about it with anyone. The better part of a decade goes by. I end up in the courtroom testifying, and I felt like everything that I had kept secret for so long all of a sudden was just out there. And I felt like there needed to be more. There needed to be a reason for all of my pain to be out there, not just for entertainment, not just for curiosity's sake. And so I remember telling my dad I wanted to do something more, and he was like, "Well, Elizabeth, you should share your story then." And at first I remember thinking, what difference is sharing my story going to make? But as I began to do it, I began to realize, you know what, actually, I didn't hear people talk about sexual abuse or violence before I was kidnapped. And even after I got home, I still didn't hear about people who had experienced those things. And I remember how alone I felt, and how could anyone else possibly understand what I went through? But as I started sharing my story, I had more and more survivors coming up to me and disclosing their own stories to me. And I began to realize the importance of stories. And as I met more survivors who shared their stories, I realized that you can share with me all the statistics in the world, and yes, they can be shocking and abhorrent, but also I don't have a memory for numbers. I mean, there's a few statistics I maybe could rattle off, but I remember stories, and I remember how they make me feel. And I remember what I learned from them. And so I just felt like when this opportunity came along, this wasn't just an opportunity to share my story, but it also was an opportunity to reach out to other victims and let them know that they're not alone, that they don't have anything to be embarrassed of, that actually this is unfortunately such a common problem in this world that they don't need to feel the shame and embarrassment.
It's incredible that the first time you talked about it was at that trial. Like, this story I remember so vividly. No one could understand it, right? It just shocked the nation to its core, right? And especially, I grew up in Colorado. So Utah, I knew it was like our neighboring state. We spent a lot of time there. My dad did a lot of work in Utah. And to know that at that trial, you were able to sit there and go through the details. And I have to ask, was it the first time your parents were hearing that too in that moment?
I mean, definitely from my own mouth.
Wow.
A few days after, or maybe it was even the second day after I was home, I mean, I was taken to the Children's Justice Center, where I was interviewed by a couple of psychiatrists that supposedly could stand proxy for me in the trial if I talked to them. That was, I'd say, a pretty traumatic experience. But I knew that after they had spoken with me, they'd went and spoken to my parents. And to this day, I don't know how much they told my parents, but I knew they did tell my parents something. Mm-hmm. But as far as like me speaking about it and going into detail, that would have been the first time that they ever heard about it.
Wow. And the length that it took basically from the arrest to the trial is kind of egregious in and of itself. When you think about it, when you see this doc, what kind of relationship do you have with that 14-year-old Elizabeth when you look back on her now?
I mean, I guess I have just a lot of compassion for myself. I was taken from my bed. I was taken from my home. Particularly after I was back, I look back on that time period and it was really hard. I mean, I wanted to go back to being who I was before I was kidnapped, and I feel like it was a really hard truth that I had to accept, that there was no going back, that I couldn't go back to the old normal, that I just had to find peace and make a new normal. And that took a while to accept.
You're just living proof that people are so much more than the traumatic events that happened to them.
Well, people always come up to me and they're like, oh, Elizabeth, you're so strong. You're so strong. I could never go through what you went through. But honestly, if I knew what was going to happen in my life before it happened, I would have said the same thing. I would have been like, there's no way I can go through that. But then when you're put in a situation where you don't have a choice, I mean, I didn't have a choice. I just had to keep going. I think that's true of all of us. I mean, when you don't have a choice, you just keep going.
And the other aspect I really want to talk about is your sister, because that's a piece of the story that's a little forgotten, like her own trauma through witnessing this, and then that pressure of being the only one that could potentially lead to your rescue.
Yeah, I mean, I asked her, do you want to watch it? And she's like, nope. Absolutely not.
Was there anything where, because a lot of your family participate, obviously, were you surprised by anything that you heard or saw or people talked about?
I mean, watching my side of the story, I didn't feel emotional at all, but watching like my family's side of the story and listening to them talk about it, 20 plus years later, but still getting emotional over it, that made me emotional. And I mean, I remember when I first got back thinking, well, it wasn't so bad for you guys. Like, you were all together, but I was by myself. But then, I mean, now as a parent myself and just watching it from, I guess, a different perspective, like what they went through was pretty horrific.
Oh, there's nothing worse. I mean, you can't even imagine. And the likelihood that you get a happy ending, which really makes you such a unicorn. But most of the time there isn't a happy ending. And I just think about for your sister, like what that would have been like as a 9-year-old, and the way we as a society try to measure, or well, why didn't she scream, or why, we like re-victimize the victims. And I think it was just so powerful when the fact that she was able to, in her own time, basically come up with knowing who it was, and then in my mind, watching it really led to you being found.
She's my hero. She saved me.
I was flipping through the Guinness World Records. And for some random reason, in that moment, the name popped into my head, and I knew immediately that's who was in my bedroom, June 2002. That's the man who kidnapped Elizabeth.
All right, well, let's talk about your family, because, and especially your dad, who really just wouldn't accept that you weren't coming back to him. And he talks so vividly about the dream. And, the detectives say your family went rogue, which
I'm so grateful they did.
Right. Like, what was that? What is your family unit like?
I mean, I am so grateful to have the family that I did have, because if I didn't, again, I might not be here. Because it's easy to look at law enforcement and feel like they are the absolute authorities. This is what they do for their living. This is their job. Like, this is what they study and live day in, day out. And if they're telling you she's dead, we're never going to find her, like, you need to make peace with that. That would be a pretty devastating blow. And so for my family just to keep on searching and not giving up, I mean, I'd say that's a pretty big miracle.
Was it hard at all to watch any of the reenactments?
Knowing what it's actually like versus a director on a set. In my mind, I'm like, that's not right. That's dead wrong. It's easy to sit there and kind of pick it apart. But actually, I thought it was very well done. I mean, I felt like one of the things that I really appreciated about working with who I worked with was just their care, their sensitivity, their conscientiousness. I mean, I remember actually seeing the first cut, and they wanted to be so sensitive to me that when I first saw it, my feedback to them was, you asked a lot of questions. We went into a lot of detail about what happened. Like, please include that, because I definitely wasn't just like sunbathing up in the mountains waiting for someone to come and rescue me. And so then they went back and adjusted it, added much more in, so that when I saw the final cut, I was like, thank you. They did my story justice.
Watching it, when they get to you, I was just like, my heart was in my throat when you're telling what happened to you, and just such the detail and the visceral nature and the way you're describing the rape and using those words. And there's just so much power in it, even, 20 some years later. After the trial for you, how quick was that journey to realizing, like, once you've said it all out loud. And once you talk about it, you kind of can't stop talking about it, right? Because you've said it now and you've seen it, and there's no more shame to it. And the word, those words and the experience doesn't have power over you anymore. How long did it kind of take to formulate what you were going to do next?
Well, my dad has always been very service oriented. I mean, even growing up, I felt like my family's motto was, leave the world better than you find it. Or if you borrowed someone's car, you made sure it was full of gas, even if you borrowed it on half a tank or whatever it was, you left what you find better. And that's really how he lived his life. I mean, he always tried, he's still alive, he always tries to, if he, works with a parent of another missing child, he tries to help them. I mean, he tries to give them more hope than maybe they originally had, or advice. Just watching that example my whole life, I feel like it wasn't just like a cannonball into the deep end. It just was like a gradual, gentle slope into the deep end, where I became more and more involved, and it felt like the right choice was always right in front of me of what I should do next. I mean, there have been times when I was like, was that the right choice? Was that what I was supposed to? I've certainly had those moments. Or, wow, that was a mistake. But for the most part, it's always been a fairly straightforward path that I've just continued on and on.
I want you to catch me up a little bit about where we are with, because you have the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, obviously talking with victims. You're pretty prolific. You just put out your third book, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You've do countless speaking engagements, right? What have you kind of learned about yourself through this process, and what's something on the horizon that you're thinking you want to do that maybe you haven't accomplished yet?
Through this all, I feel like I've learned one person can make a difference. I mean, I can make a difference. I don't just have to sit on the sidelines and watch other people make a difference. I can do something too. I can add to it. I feel like that's probably what I learned, because maybe everyone feels like this, but maybe not. But I definitely felt like this. I remember just as a kid thinking, well, I'm just one person. Like, what could I possibly do that would make a difference? how could my opinion or my thoughts change anything in this world? And now I feel like, actually, no, I can make a difference. And it's okay if people disagree, and, you know, it's okay if they have their own thoughts, but someone should talk about it, and why not me?
You talk a little bit about people coming up to you. How do you hold their confession or their own trauma when they're telling you about what's happened to them? And sometimes you're the only person they've ever told.
I mean, first of all, I am deeply honored that people feel like they can share it with me, because it takes a great deal of courage to share the worst moments of your life. And I think the fear of being judged or blamed for not doing something more is a very big reason why people don't share their stories, so that people have faith in me that I'm a safe person. That's something I don't take lightly. On the flip side of things, I mean, I typically don't watch a whole lot of crime documentaries right before bed. I don't really like watching really intense movies or I don't know, killing and blood and drama. I mean, that's just something that I feel like I need to separate from, because in the work that I do and the people I come into contact with, that's enough. That's more than enough hard stories and nightmares that I hear, that I don't need the last thing I see before going to sleep is someone killing someone else.
Yeah. Do you watch The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City?
No. I mean, I've met a few of them, but
I would imagine.
I haven't watched it.
And did you ever think about getting out of Utah?
I mean, my husband is from Scotland, like born and raised, has a green card. There have definitely been times where I'm like, maybe we should. Which is actually funny, because when we first got married, I was like, yeah, we're staying in America. And he's like, oh, well, we'll stay here for a little bit, but then we'll go back to Scotland. And now it's a little bit the opposite. Like, I love America. I love Utah. Like, I would never give up my citizenship ever. But sometimes now I'm like, maybe we should go to Scotland. He's like, no.
Oh, so he's flipped now.
Yeah.
Where did you guys met when you were on a mission, right? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah.
And had he known anything about you?
No.
Oh my God, what was that like?
I mean, it was nice. Just like having someone like me for me. And I'm not saying that other people didn't, but there's always a thought at the back of your head being like, well, do they really? And I mean, because he didn't know anything in my past, I mean, he wasn't afraid to tell me what he really thought.
Yeah.
Which I love, but also sometimes. Whereas like before, a lot of people were just like, oh yeah, yeah. And I don't know if it's because they were afraid to like hurt my feelings or I don't know. But I guess with him, I initially liked the pushback. No, I still like it, but
Does he have a thick Scottish accent?
I mean, when I first met him, I used to have to say things like, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that just one more time? I'm sorry. And then when I went to Scotland and I met his family, then I was just like, I know they're speaking English, but I swear it's not the same language.
Yeah, no, it's hard.
I was like, could you please tell me what they're saying? I mean, now, we've been married for 14 years, so I don't even hear his accent anymore.
Do your kids have a little of the accent? Not any words of like woot or...
I mean, like they might say bin instead of trash.
Okay.
But it's definitely with an American accent.
What was that like when you had to tell him? I mean, obviously he had to know, and it was...
I mean, we were in a group setting, so a lot of the other missionaries told him, but I think that's another thing that I appreciated about, or I still do appreciate about him, is that I'm not my past. I am just who I am right now, right here in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And 3 kids.
Yeah.
Are we going to have any more?
No.
You're done at 3.
Done.
Okay. So one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about is I was raised very Catholic, like I always say, 8-day-a-week Catholic. And some of the things that you spoke about were some of the things that I was taught as well, right? About very little sex education, just a very conservative, very the need to wait to have sex until marriage, obviously being brought up Mormon, and to be victimized by people that have taken that to a deranged extreme. How is that for you communicating your story to your children?
I mean, one of the best pieces of advice that I was given was the right time to start talking to your kids is when they ask questions. That actually led to me answering questions way before I was ready to answer questions. I mean, my oldest was 3 years old when she started asking questions. So and I just remember thinking, I'm not ready for this. Why are you asking these questions? I'm not ready. But then I remember that piece of advice and I was like, well, it shouldn't be a secret. And as they grow, I definitely want them to understand, if I say no to something or I don't believe in sleepovers, I want them to understand why I'm saying no. And so, I mean, I didn't go into
of course not.
detail. I mean, it was actually a very simple explanation. I think when she first asked at 3 years old, I said, well, there was a very bad man and he took me away from my family and he hurt me and now he's in jail. Then as she has grown, she's now 10, almost 11.
That's called preteen. You're getting into preteen years.
I feel like because I spoke about it and I answered her questions young, I feel like that has left the door open for us to talk about it and any other difficult subject as she's grown, because I didn't just shut her down and just say, I'll talk to you about it when you're older.
And I also read that you've named all the body parts for your kids so they know.
I mean, after I was rescued, when I was being interviewed by those 2 psychiatrists, I went in there and they're like, okay, so what happened? And I was like, well, I was molested. And they're like, okay, but can you explain it? And then I was like, well, I was raped. And they're like, well, yeah, but can you describe the rape? And I was like, well, he forced himself inside of me. And they're like, we need you to say exact body parts. Can you please use the anatomically correct names? And so then I had to get to a point where I said he forced his penis in my vagina repeatedly. And that for me was just so embarrassing and difficult. I mean, for one, using the correct body part names just because, I mean, they were your privates.
Of course.
They weren't penis and vagina in my house growing up. They were your privates. That was very embarrassing. But then also, I was still a young girl. I was being interviewed by 2 middle-aged men who were both clearly religious. I could see they were religious, which, I mean, good for them. But all of these ingredients that made that situation just about unbearable for me. You know, I'd just been kidnapped and raped by a middle-aged man using the guise of religion. And then these men are there, felt like the same situation, and I was being backed into a corner yet again. So now with my own kids, I'm like, yeah, that's your penis. And it's a body part, and it's, nobody has any shame around hand. Nobody has any shame around elbow. Why should there be shame around vagina or penis? And so sometimes, there's been a few situations where I'm like, can we not talk about this right now in public? But at the same time, I'm glad that they don't have that embarrassment around those body parts.
Mm-hmm. That is, you bring up such a good point about being re-traumatized right after your rescue. In the work that you do as an advocate, have you pushed to change that to make sure it would have made a huge difference? I'm sure if there was just a woman in the room with you.
I agree completely. And actually, that is not something I've personally worked on, but I feel like advocacy centers in and of themselves have come to that conclusion. And there are so many advocacy centers that do such a wonderful, wonderful job trying to make it streamline, whether it's with just not hidden, but discrete cameras and like earpieces. So if law enforcement has to get certain information from children, the forensic interviewer can ask in a trauma sensitive way without the intimidation of maybe a police officer in the room, or just like the imbalance of power between maybe a big burly man versus a little girl.
Well, you just talk about like you've just been rescued, and even in the doc, which is just so incredible when you're telling that story, or the police detective is telling the story of, you've been recognized, or Emmanuel's been recognized because of the sketch, because of your sister, and because of your parents going rogue. That officer moved you to the side, had sensed enough that something was not right. Right? Even though they were, everything's nothing to see over here. But even then, it was so traumatic when he's asking, are you Elizabeth Smart? Are you Elizabeth Smart? And your response is, thou sayest. It's just to go from that to then suddenly the next day or that afternoon talking in that room is kind of just reprehensible to think about.
The day that I was rescued, yes, it was one of the happiest days of my life, but also it was very traumatic. I mean, I lived with an immense amount of fear for 9 months. Nobody had protected me from my captors. Nobody had stopped them from hurting me, raping me, withholding food, water, clothes from me for 9 months. And so I didn't know if anyone could. And I felt like at the end of the day, my captors would get away, just like they got away with everything else, whether it was stealing or lying or manipulating people into giving them money or whatever it was they wanted. That still felt like a very real outcome. And in my mind, I felt like I couldn't be seen as just like, yes, save me, rescue me. But it's almost hard to articulate it. I feel like I had to, I was scared. There was a lot of fear there. I didn't know what the police officers were thinking, if they were really there to help me, if I was in trouble. It felt very intense. And I was just a very, very scared little girl. Then, immediately being interviewed by police that day and then interviewed again by these 2 psychiatrists the next day. It felt like I had no control. It felt like my voice didn't matter. It felt like, the grown-ups know best. But at the same time, there was no grown-up there to protect me while I was kidnapped. And that felt unfair.
Is that part of the reason why you went into that courtroom 7, 8 years later?
At that point, I just felt like this is ridiculous. Utah had the statute of limitations still in place at that time, and it was about to expire, which meant that my captors would walk free. And that just blew my mind. How could that even happen? Everybody knew that they were guilty, and yet there was a possibility that they could walk free. Fortunately now, the statute of limitations on child sex crimes in Utah is no longer. And that was when it was prosecuted in the federal courts. But at that point in time, 8 years passed. And at that point, it just felt like there's no way I ever want these people to walk free ever again. If I need to do this, then this is what I'm going to do because I want this done. And actually, I remember sitting in the courtroom looking at the defense team, and I just had such disgust. How could attorneys defend what my captors had done? I just had complete disgust for them. And then at the end of the trial, I remember the lead defense attorney coming up to me and saying, Elizabeth, I want you to know I did the absolute best job I could do so that you never have to go through this again, so that this trial could never be appealed, so that the ruling was final. And he's like, I know what they did to you. I know they're not innocent, but I did the best job I could. And actually in that moment, I changed my opinion instantly. I had such a deep respect, at least for the lead attorney.
Yeah, a bit. Well, I just unfortunately read that one of your captors who was released was just arrested for violating parole. So
Yeah. I was disappointed when she was released from prison, but I also feel like, it's only about 1 out of every 1,000 perpetrators is successfully prosecuted. And I at least got that successful prosecution. But knowing that she was released also gave me such a compassion for all of the victims whose perpetrators are never even named and who live in constant fear of them coming back or hurting them again. And so as disappointed as I am grateful for that understanding and compassion now that I've learned.
how's your relationship with faith these days?
Just because someone tells me something doesn't mean I believe it. I don't want to say I'm a cynical person because I don't think I am, but that also doesn't mean that I just believe blindly anymore.
How is it with raising a family and still being in Utah and all of that? How is that for you?
I feel like I'm pretty open with my kids and that I want them to find out for themselves. And if whatever their decisions are, I want them to know that I'll support them, but I just want them to really think about what they believe. Think about what they accept into their life. Is that something that truly means something to them, or is that just because everybody else is going that direction?
It's incredible. And I also have to say, the journey your own dad has been on is pretty amazing. And how strong he's been and just the openness with which the both of you have.
It was a learning experience.
Is most of your family in Utah?
Yeah.
Everyone still is. Wow. Do you get recognized when you walk around on the streets? And
In Salt Lake.
I mean, you must, right?
In my neighborhood, yeah. At the grocery store, yeah. At Costco, yeah. At the airport, yeah. But if I travel outside of Utah, I feel like it's not as much because I think people wouldn't expect to see me there.
what are some of the unexpected things and happy surprises that have come along the way through this journey of yours? And with your advocacy, yes, I understand the kind of strength you bring, but what are some of the sillier, lighter things that also happen?
I mean, I think initially, I wanted to be taken so seriously. I didn't want to just be dismissed, that I said no to some things. I was asked years ago if I wanted to go on Dancing with the Stars, and I said no because I was I want people to take me seriously. Now I'm I totally should have done that. But then a few years ago during COVID, I was asked to go on Masked Dancer, and I did. Honestly, it was terrifying, but it was so much fun because I'm not naturally coordinated. So then again, maybe it's a good thing I never went on Dancing
Maybe
with
not.
Stars.
There's still time.
But that was pretty fun. That definitely pushed me outside of my comfort zone a lot.
What brings you the most joy in your day-to-day life?
I like being at home with my family, a good dinner, and then movie with my kids, or traveling up to our cabin and going out boating and watching my kids learn how to surf behind the boat and just enjoying being outside. I mean, yeah, right now my kids are all on a ski team.
Oh, wow.
And so
Okay.
watching them, I mean, honestly, out ski me is pretty exciting.
All right, so you do a lot of running, and we see you running in the dock. And is that part of that physical being in the world, right? You're super strong. And I'm curious, would you ever run a marathon? Would you ever?
I have.
You have? Okay,
I
talk to me
have.
about that.
I trained for 5. I ran 4.
Wow.
The 5th one, it was in Big Bear.
Oh.
And I flew all the way out here, picked up my bib, did everything. We booked an Airbnb at the top of the course because we were we can sleep in a little later instead of waking up at 3 or 2 a.m. to catch the bus up to the top. And then I got a text message. I woke up to a text message at about 2:30 a.m. and it was canceled.
Why?
There had been snow on the road and there were
Oh,
accidents.
that's
And so they
terrible.
canceled it. And I was so angry because I had trained so hard. And the last marathon I'd ran before that, like I wanted to qualify for Boston so bad. And the last marathon I'd run before, I was only 7 minutes too slow. I mean, probably wouldn't have
You're
gotten in.
fast. You have to like be, what is the qualifier for Boston? Like
So
four,
for my age group, I mean, they recently changed it, but for my age group, it used to be 3:35.
I was just going to say wow.
And I was 7 minutes too slow. And like, it's such, well, you said, you told me you
I
ran
know,
marathons.
I have. I've run two, but I would never dream of
I'm not
posting.
naturally fast. I am not naturally fast. Like that was so much training to even be that close. And when I was 7 minutes too slow, I mean, crossing the finish line is such a like life achievement, like big moment. But I remember just crossing it and crying because I was like, all that, I have to do that whole thing again to try to qualify. I was off like, that was what, like seconds off of my
Yeah.
miles spread out over 26.2.
Yeah. All right. So I ask every one of my guests like a series of questions. So,
Okay.
and the first one I'm fascinated by the answers that I get. It's about birth order.
Okay.
What about who you are in the world do you think has to do with your birth order? And first of all, what is your birth order? I don't even know.
I'm second out of 6.
And the oldest girl, right? Yes.
Yeah, I'm the oldest girl. Yeah.
So you and your sister are the only 2 girls. Okay.
I mean, my first reaction is nothing. But I guess thinking more about it, I mean, I always looked up to my big brother and it felt like he always got to do the cool stuff. Like he was in Boy Scouts and they'd like do their winter camp and make igloos and sleep outside. And I remember feeling like, oh, that's great. Us girls are at home learning how to sew on buttons. Like, this is lame. So I remember feeling like I kind of had something to prove back then. So maybe that made a difference.
Yeah, and there's a whole meme going on about the oldest daughters having the oldest daughters. And I happen to catch that your oldest is a daughter.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I don't know if you've seen any of that on social media
I
about.
have seen that, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to close with just asking you kind of what have been some real wins for you in like the last year or two?
Keeping all my kids alive, especially my son. He has no fear or sense of self-preservation. So that feels like a win. But outside of that, I mean, releasing my 3rd book, like that feels like a big win sitting here today. This documentary has been on my mind for, has it been 18 months, 2 years? I can't even remember, but it's been on my mind for a long time. So being here on the precipice of its release, that feels exciting. I feel like those are pretty big wins. Yeah, just being happy and healthy.
What do you hope people take away from the doc?
First of all, if you've experienced anything similar, you're not alone, and that there's a lot of more good people out there than there are bad people, and hopefully give them hope that they don't need to live in shame or embarrassment or fear, and that they can still have a wonderful life. I hope everyone feels like, all of us have a story, and we've all only experienced our own worst pain, but that doesn't have to destroy the rest of your life. You can still be happy. You can still pursue everything you ever wanted to. And if you believe something, you should never give up.
Thank you, Elizabeth Smart. It's great to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.